Hello, I'm Kristen from Impressing Minds. Today I want to talk about adopting domestically or internationally. So, when my husband and I wanted to adopt a child, we had investigated an international adoption. We wanted to go to the Ukraine and adopt a child. And the website information that we were researching, we found out that we needed a home study. So this home study had to be done by a licensed social worker. So we were like, wow, okay. We know a social worker. And we, texted her, messaged her and said, are you willing to do our home study if we decide to adopt a child? And she said, yes, actually, that's what I do. And so we were like, wow, that's great. And we were talking to her about adoption. She said, well, there are also kids in the United States who need adoption. There are thousands and thousands of them. Why don't you consider that instead of an international adoption? And we said, okay. So we started the process to foster to adopt. And this was several years ago. So foster to adopt is now really kind of looked down on when you say, I want to foster to adopt. The reason is that the goal of foster care is to reunify. And if you're just wanting to adopt, you aren't going to be willing to try to help the kid reunify or help the bio parent reunify. So we started classes for our home study and got the process going, and everything. So we decided to do domestic or through foster care, adopt that way. And we're glad that we did that. We didn't know anything about it. We didn't know, how many children were in need to be adopted. Also, we already had 2 children, so we really didn't know, financially how long it might take to raise the funds for an international adoption. Nowadays, there's a lot of problems with international adoptions. You've heard of your horror stories probably from Russia, baby mills, and people almost manipulating parents to take their children from other countries to adopt them here in the United States at a very high cost. So adoption, in the past 20, 30 years has really gotten a negative connotation from international avenues. Apparently what they're doing is they're going into some place, I'll say Korea, South Korea or something, and they would say to a young pregnant mom, I can give your child such a better life over in the United States. Why don't you let me take your child and I'll have them adopted in the United States, and you can still keep in touch with them and write letters and, have a relationship with them, but they would be raised by the American family. And so these people would say, oh, that is really good because, here in South Korea or wherever, maybe they're in the poorer community without many opportunities, would say, yeah, that's a great idea. It reminds me of, the 30s, 40s. I'm not sure exactly the time frame, but they did that to people in the United States as well. They went into poor neighborhoods, would take children and put them up for adoption. If you haven't read the book by Lisa Wingate, it's called Before We Were Yours. It talks about this, and it's such a good book. Oh my gosh, I love this book. And it explains how these children are manipulated, their parents were manipulated to give them up. And they didn't really want to give them up, but they didn't have resources, and they weren't told the truth about where their children were going. And so it's just a really good book, and it explains a lot of that era of adoption. So the same thing apparently was going on overseas. And so that's why, international adoptions have got kind of a negative, aspect to them. So domestic adoptions, though, if you want to adopt a child, domestically, there are websites that you can sign up on, and the birth mom can choose you to be the adopted parent. And you can choose open adoption or closed adoption, however you're comfortable with. How do you get chosen? The birth mother would select you. A good example of this is on Friends. Near the end, Monica and Chandler want to adopt a baby, and so they go to this adoption website, and they're like so excited. They hope that the mom chooses them. Chandler makes a big, he just makes a big idiot of himself. And so there's that storyline. That's kind of what you can do. You can really, look for a pregnant mom who wants to give up her child. And that's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. Those babies need homes and need parents and families. So that's one option. So international adoption, domestic adoption, and then you have foster care. And you can adopt from foster care. There are already so many children ready to be adopted. On the list, there's a list, Adopt U.S. Kids. And I mean, I don't know if there's a list of kids, or pictures, but there are kids up for adoption. My state has some state kids that are up for adoption already. So there's an option for you to look on those websites and see if any of those children you think the age would work for you. If you think, you want a boy or a girl because of your living arrangements would be better for you, you can go ahead and look and see if any of those, spark an interest. In the old days, they used to have these adoption fairs on those where they would, almost display the children, and then potential parents would come and look at them, get their file out, look at their file and say, what all about them, I don't know, medical history and whatever. That was almost like going and picking out a dog from the pound. It's very humiliating, I feel like, for the child to almost perform so the child would be adopted, so they would be adopted. But from foster care, you can also, do foster care. And if the child, while they're in your care, comes up for adoption, you, having a bond with the child, should be a probable placement, adoptive placement for them as well. So if parental rights are terminated, then they could say, are you interested in adoption? And you can say yes or no. So that's one way to adopt from foster care in the United States. And also, I think, in Canada. So the option that we chose was the foster to adopt. But back then, they only had adopt. Also, that's an option. So I would be on a list when rights were terminated, and the foster parent that they were with said, no, we don't want to adopt, we just still want to foster. So that those children would be put on the adoption list. And then the adoptive parents, and the adoptive children, they would try to match them up. And it was usually matched by worker, like she would know, this couple over here are wanting to adopt, are these children suitable? And they would just kind of match them up within their own agency, I guess you'd call it. That's one option. Another option would be through an agency that you're on the list just for adopting. So when someone's parental rights are terminated or a baby is given up for adoption, you are on the list. You always have to go through the interview process. You always have to go through those classes to get those children with their parental rights terminated. So I hope this video is pretty short and informal. I hope that it explains domestic as well as international adoptions and which one might be right for you. Of course, we went through foster to adopt, but back then there was just the adoption option, and that's what we picked the first time. And the second time, we did foster care for 10 years after that, and then we actually did adopt 3 more. And those were the children whose rights were terminated, and then they were like, "Are you interested?" And we were like, "Oh, yes." We were so bonded and attached to them, we were not going to say no to that. So that's my story and a little information about which option you may be leaning toward, giving you a little information about that. So thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to subscribe and then share this video with someone who you think may be interested in adopting.